Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui. And boy, what a week it has been. Not only do we have the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO, the capture of the alleged suspect, but also all of the changes that are happening in Syria. There's a lot to pay attention to. And it's all screaming Pluto and Aquarius. We're in it, folks. And, like I said in a previous episode about what we can expect from Pluto and Aquarius, we can expect a lot of upsets and the unexpected. So it's difficult to exactly predict how every little detail is going to play out because in a lot of ways we're in new territory. And I have felt that very strongly in watching the public reactions to the news this week. And I hope that you're taking notice of it too, because times are changing. They're changing very quickly. And if we look at the past year, 2024, a lot of us have been going through it, and I'm right there with you. I have also been going through it. But as I've tried to explain to people, I really do feel that 2024 is getting us ready for this new moment that we're in. And we have had to navigate a lot of this uncertainty and upset. But I think that we are all in a better place because of it, and we're more prepared to handle the moment that we're in. The themes of people power and equity and liberation are going to keep coming up over the course of Pluto and Aquarius. And it's because people have had enough. And we are starting to see the level of consciousness raise around what we can do about it. Are we sitting here powerless at the hands of all of these corrupt institutions? Or do we have more power than they want us to think? And imagine what is going to be possible if we continue on this trajectory of looking at things more critically and also collaborating with other people who see that there's a problem. One of the most inspiring things about this past week has been seeing people on very different political spectrums agreeing about a lot of the issues that we have in this country. And I really think that people need to take note of that because after the election, what I was seeing was a ton of divisiveness and an unwillingness to see why Kamala Harris lost the presidential election, how we got here. And ignoring those realities, I think, is leaving a lot of room for these existing institutions to continue exploiting us, pitting us against each other, and not having these conversations where we realize, hey, actually, a lot of their issues are the same. We might not agree about the solutions or even some of the details, but there is a lot of common ground that we can really lean into. So please have these conversations with people who you know that you're in community with in some regard, who might view the world very differently than you, because I do think that the events that we're seeing are good conversation starters. They are potential bridge builders if we are willing to put in the energy to educate each other gently. But I genuinely think that the level of unity and outcry that we have seen is scaring the people in power, because the events that we're seeing are clarifying the hypocrisy of systemic violence. They will condemn interpersonal violence, violence that has political motivations, but then when it comes down to wars, genocides, healthcare companies simply not covering people's healthcare, that's all okay. We're told to sit and be quiet and accept what we get. And I don't think that that's going to work anymore. And it's high time. We're really overdue for this. But here we are. Pluto's in Aquarius. And there's a lot of work to do. Let's do it. Today on the podcast, I talk about the expansive Gemini full moon happening on December 15th. Then stick around for the astrology of the week ahead. We have another full moon coming up, if you can believe it. And this one is in the sign of Gemini. It's happening on Sunday, December 15th at 1:01 a.m. Pacific time, and it'll be at 23 degrees and 52 minutes of Gemini. So some interesting things about this full moon. The only aspects that the moon is really making is square Neptune and a very wide conjunction to Jupiter. And if you're keeping track, this is the first full moon that we'll have since Pluto moved into Aquarius for the next 19 years. So I'm kind of getting the sense that this is going to be a bit of a temperature check. And like I said, we've been through a lot of change and transformation this year. And this is the beginning of really a new chapter for humanity. And that includes our individual personal lives. So I do think that this is one that's really worth paying a lot of attention to in terms of how it shows up for you in your life with your personal astrology. A lot is going to change during Pluto in Aquarius. And given that this full moon is in Gemini, Gemini is the sign of the learner, of the student. And it benefits us to approach this time period as students, to realize that we don't know everything, that a lot of different things are possible. So it's kind of crucial that we don't just go with the default way of doing or thinking about things. As I have said many times before at this point, it is important that we be flexible, we be adaptable. And those are things that come very naturally to very curious, mutable Gemini energy. So I think that there is a lot from this full moon that we can kind of take with us as we move through the rest of this time period. So I would be reflecting on how have we been open to learning over these past 6 months. Full moons are always the closing of a chapter in a certain way. So if you look back at the new moon in Gemini, which happened around June 6, 2024, you were planting seeds back then, whether you were doing it consciously or not. You were investing your energy in some way. And so right now, this is the end of that cycle. So with this full moon, you're going to be seeing some of the results of whatever energy you were putting out into the world at that particular moment. You may find yourself reflecting on the discoveries that you've made about your mindset, the way you communicate, and who you communicate with. Are you communicating to hear yourself talk? Or are you listening too? Because that's a part of communication that we don't tend to think about. But if we don't listen, we're not really communicating, are we? That's more projecting than communicating. And all along, I have been talking about how Pluto in Aquarius is going to require all of us to get better at communicating, to get better at working with others, collaborating, because it is going to be movements, groups that are coming to the forefront during this time period and are really going to be empowered to make a lot of the changes that we need socially. So you may have some realizations about the impact of your communication, how you've used your voice or not, and the impact of your ideas, your contributions, and even how you communicate with yourself, how you communicate your ideas, how you put them out into the world or not. You may be realizing, oh, there are some adjustments that I could make here. And there might be better ways of approaching these things that are going to enable me to do more in the time period to come. And if you have been learning, communicating, growing, following your curiosity, you're probably seeing some fruits of that work coming around right about now. If you have been organizing in your own neighborhood or community, you might be seeing some beautiful results coming for you this full moon. Another thing we can think about with this full moon energy is the relationship between our mindset and our intuition. Can you trust what you think and how you feel? Or has one been taking priority over another? Has one compromised another? Because it is very important that we engage our mind, that we develop and grow and learn, not deciding that we already know everything. We know everything there is to know, so, close the book, plug your ears, and, hope it works out. That's probably not a great approach. And sometimes our intuition can give us information that isn't readily apparent to our minds. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be grounded in following our intuition and using our discernment. But if we are just logic, sometimes we will miss those intuitive insights that we just get a feeling, a sixth sense, something that maybe science can't quite explain, but is still a reality of our human existence. Cultivating our minds and our intuition don't have to be at odds with one another. We can do both, and in fact, we should for the moment that we're in. Neptune is direct now. I've seen tons of conspiracy theories already taken hold. Things that, they could be possible, but the facts that we have in front of us are indicating that maybe that is not the case. So we really are going to have to practice this balancing act between intuitive and mental processes. They can inform one another, but it's very important that we keep our feet on the ground in a moment where there's a lot of things and people and systems vying for our attention. So we really do have to commit to that growth and to exploring and finding real information, real truth, and not just defaulting to what everyone else is saying or doing. It's not really intelligent. That's not really connecting us to other people in a sincere way. There is power in acknowledging that we don't know everything. And especially when we're seeing world events happen, we don't know everything right away. Things often come out that are misinformation and that are just not accurate, right? And then we see people grab and run with these things. And that's not really being open to the situation. That's not really being a learner. That's being excited to know the answers and have it all right in front of us. And sometimes that's just not how information works. We don't really ever have to be finished because information can always come to us. And I think truly intelligent people know this. They know that the learning doesn't stop. They know that just because something is true in a certain moment doesn't mean that when new information is presented, that it might change your perception of the thing that you maybe knew really strongly at one point. There are a lot of lessons to be taken from this Gemini full moon. It is a moment where we can really expand our understanding and we can take notice of the lessons that we've learned over the last 6 months, because surely we've all had a lot of growth. Our minds are evolving. I've had so many headaches over the past 6 months, and I really feel like it's because my brain is just processing so much at such a high rate that I can't help but feel like it's expanding in some way. Maybe not literally in a physical way, but we are undergoing this process of expansion, and it is asking us to keep up. So the last thing I want to highlight with this full moon is, all of us have had a really intense past 6 months. On a collective level, we're just processing a lot of information, a lot of events, and we're doing it at a time period where we have more access to information and a million different takes and perspectives. It is a lot. And I know a lot of us love information and knowing things and doing that processing on some level, but it's not necessarily the best for us to always be plugged in. So remember to think about how taking breaks, giving your mind a rest, leaving room for those intuitive moments where you're connecting with the more physical and spiritual parts of who you are, and not just the logic, not just the mental part, as important as it is. Because our minds are a part of our body, and we often neglect mental rest because it's just so easy we can even be laying down, going to sleep, and we're just taking in all this information. Remember to unplug. And if you haven't been very good at that in this past 6 months, I completely get it. I haven't been great at it either. But maybe reflect on that. How has that panned out for you? Full moons are about illumination, right? You look at the moon and that shit is lit up. And it's very similar to how the energy kind of plays out in our individual lives and on a collective level as well. Things that come up around the full moon are like having, a cop's flashlight right in your eye at times. Not always the most pleasant feeling, but something is being revealed. So whatever is coming up for you at this particular moment, you can look at where 23 degrees of Gemini is in your astrology chart, and the house that you find that degree in is going to give you a little bit more insight on what area of life is going to be illuminated by this Gemini full moon, where you can kind of focus your attention and reflection for this moment. So our job with the full moon is to pay attention, to simply observe what comes up. You can do any kind of ritual that you would like that makes you feel connected to this energy, that symbolizes what you are working with at this particular moment. A very common experience around full moons is that the things that haven't been working in these past 6 months especially will become very apparent. And there can be discomfort in that because you're like, this thing is just not thinging the way I need it to. And I would take that as a sign that there are adjustments that can be made, and maybe things that you can just straight up let go of, like this unhelpful mental habit or this toxic relationship. These things don't have to continue the way that they are. And so pay attention to the things that aren't feeling so good around the full moon, because oftentimes, like when we have pain in our physical body, it's alerting us that something is wrong. And it's not so different when we deal with that mental, emotional, spiritual discomfort. Ultimately, this Gemini full moon is revealing that more is possible for us. It is very expansive energy. We don't have to limit ourselves to what we are right in this moment or what life around us is in this moment, because we have our mental faculties. We have our ability to think and speak and communicate, and perhaps even change our behavior in those areas. We are not stuck. We are not as limited as we have been led to believe. So being open to those things, and being open to being wrong, to changing your mind, to learning new information, and making things more fun, honestly. Gamifying your learning in life and your growth in life. You don't have to know everything. You don't know how the story is going to end, and nobody does. There is peace in taking that approach. We are all learners in life. Always. Until we're dead. And maybe even after then. I don't fucking know. But for this Gemini full moon, be open to expansion. Because you're worth it, and we're worth it, right? We don't have to settle. Let's talk about some of the highlights from this coming week. So the day this podcast comes out, Wednesday, December 11th, should be a very interesting day. We have the moon moving into Taurus early in the morning here on the West Coast. And because it's in Taurus, it will be square Pluto, square Venus, and square Mars all on the same day. So it's a lot of action. It'll probably be a very interesting one. We might see people being a little bit more unpredictable, a little bit more reactive that day. I would say the fact that Mercury is retrograde, kind of ripe for miscommunication type of things to be happening. So keep that in mind. Thursday, December 12th, we have Venus opposing Mars, and Mars is still retrograde, of course. But this is a good day to check in on your alignment. And what I mean by that is, are you aware of the things that you want and need in life? What is very important to you? That would be the first thing. And how do your actions reflect that? Or are they not actually reflecting that? This is a moment to make adjustments that you might need to make. and really lean into the things that are inspiring you, that are giving you that sense of fullness and passion and inspiration. The things that you would do if you didn't have to do them anyway, just because that desire is there. Now, remember, we have that full moon in Gemini happening on Sunday, December 15th. So from the moment this podcast comes out until then, we are in the energetic lead up to that full moon. So this is where our emotions start coming to the surface. We might find ourselves being a little bit more physically sensitive or intuitively sensitive or just emotional over this time. And as I always advise people, those are moments where instead of being like, a feeling, no, running away from the things that are happening to us, we can face them head on and understand that there is something to learn from those moments, and specifically in relationship to that coming Gemini full moon. So pay attention to the things that don't feel so good, that aren't working right. And this is another place where that realignment and reflection is going to be very helpful, because when we know what we want and what we need, that's a very good place to compare what's coming up. Is the thing that I'm noticing that's not working so right, is it working with this desire or need that I have? And if not, why is that? And what does that tell me about what I need to do next? The moon will be moving into Gemini on Friday the 13th at 9:21 a.m. Pacific time. So we will really be moving towards that full moon. This energy is more social. It is very thoughtful because, of course, Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which is the planet that rules our minds and logic, things like that. So we might find ourselves being a little bit more communicative with ourselves or other people. We might have the desire to be a little bit more social leading up to this full moon than we might with other full moons. And this energy can be really reflective because of that. So I would, again, just pay attention. Take notes if you need to. Voice notes, write things down, whatever works best for you. But documenting these things and verbally processing them in whatever way is most comfortable to you is probably going to give you the best results. And what I see over the course of this weekend in general is a lot of assessment, of reflection about what it is that we want, where we're going long term, and our potential to learn, grow, and explore through those things. So the lead up to the full moon, very much in line with the themes of the full moon itself. So we will have a lot of time to really think and process all of this stuff and really make some decisions about whether we want our present limitations to actually be limitations, or if there are things that we can work with or work around that can inform the situation in some way. Sunday, we have that full moon happening at 1:01 a.m. Pacific time. So a lot of us will probably be asleep or wishing we were asleep when this full moon is happening. And if you don't already know, full moons are a very common time where, people get very stirred up and emotional and sometimes even erratic or unpredictable. So that could certainly be part of this. But it is very common to have sleep issues around full moons. And particularly for those of us that experience them happening in the middle of the night when a lot of us probably should be asleep. Later on the 15th at 11:21 a.m. Pacific time, we have the moon moving into Cancer. And so I feel like this energy is going to be pretty sleepy Cancer energy, given the fact that we have this lead up to the full moon, and then usually there's a feeling of release that happens because it's like this buildup of this bubble of energy, and then the full moon happens, kind of can feel like that balloon popped. And for those of us who have been very stimulated by the lead up to the full moon, we're probably just going to be pretty tired. And I have very good news for all my Mercury retrograde haters, because another thing that's happening on Sunday the 15th is that Mercury is stationing direct at 12:56 p.m. Pacific time, and it's still in Sagittarius, so We get to kind of go over some stuff that we've already been over in the not too distant past. And that is because Mercury will be traveling once again through all of the Sagittarius energy that it already went through and then backed up over. But for those of us who are tired of the tech issues, the miscommunications, maybe the issues with work or friends or the vehicle, transportation, planning, all of that kind of stuff, if you're sick of it, that's when it's going to start to kind of level off as Mercury stations direct. We're not totally out of the clear yet, but usually that move through the shadow isn't as extreme as the actual retrograde. I do think over these last few days of Mercury retrograde, we have the potential to see some really interesting political information come out that was maybe tabled before or missed. So I will be looking closely at that. My personal wish list on that is the Gates report, because I think we got past that story a little too quickly, and I think the people deserve to see whatever the fuck that man got up to. And our taxes did pay for that investigation and the report, so, it would be nice if we could see what we bought. I regret to inform you that Monday, December 16th does look very Monday-ish to me. We have the moon trining Saturn early in the day here in the United States, and things just feel a little bit more confining, a little bit weightier, but it can also be a very constructive day if you play your cards right, and we'll still very much be in the wake of that full moon energy. So, those epiphanies, those realizations may very much be happening. I would encourage us, as the moon is in Cancer, to really focus on the self-care. The energy leading up to that with the Gemini full moon is very, very mental. And like I was saying, we take for granted how much energy doing mental things takes. And in fact, there's jokes made all the time about people who sit at their computers all the time. And you can totally sit at a computer and zone out, but I feel like a lot of us that do work on computers, people take for granted the fact that we are actually working. Just because we may not be physically moving that much, our minds are working, and it can be very exhausting if you are somebody that does that kind of work, right? So Sunday into Monday, I really think it's important that we pay attention to our physical needs and our emotional needs, our sense of comfort and restoration. We are often very good at taking care of other people, other things, especially those of us who have been socialized to take care of men or children. So, we can neglect those things. And so the energy is really conducive to supporting yourself through that. And especially because after the moon moves out of Cancer, it of course moves into the sign of Leo. And that's happening at 3:39 p.m. Pacific time on Tuesday the 17th. So as soon as it moves into Leo, it's opposing Pluto in Aquarius. You may find that there's some inner tension or just kind of tension in the air. The news will probably be very interesting on that day as well. But it's energy where things can tend to feel a little bit more on the serious side than we might like them to feel. And of course, we still have Mars in Leo, and so between Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to have the moon cozying right up to Mars. Thankfully, it is retrograde, so it's just a little bit more of intense energy. But it can also be very inspiring. You might just have some moments where it could even be frustration spurs you to make a decision or take a different approach that you might not have otherwise thought of. So as always, we want to look for the opportunities with any energy. There is always opportunities to take advantage of the moment that we're in. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It doesn't have to come at the cost of yourself or other people. But when we remain open to possibilities, to opportunities, to potential learning, and we are focused on the things that we want and need and feel very passionate about, it can be very clarifying in these moments to realize, hey, this thing isn't working, so it's time to try something different. Liberate yourself to be open to taking a different tactic. Leo is the sign of creativity and play. And so when we have things that feel like obstacles, maybe they don't have to feel so foreboding if we're just like, you know what? I'm going to gamify this thing. I'm going to create through this thing. I'm going to let it propel me in the direction that I want to go in rather than stopping me in my tracks. Create around these things and through these challenging moments. And oftentimes I think when we do that, we find that what we make is actually a lot more beautiful and inspired than we might have ever thought possible. So a really creative and reflective week ahead. Another thing that sponsors of this podcast can look forward to this week is the Pluto and Aquarius and You episode that I've been working on. This is where I talk about how Pluto moving through Aquarius is going to impact your astrology chart. So that'll be coming out sometime this week for sponsors of this podcast. If you are not a sponsor of this podcast, you can become one for just $5 a month. You get bonus episodes and all kinds of other goodies, as well as access to the Petty Astrology community. We have the Astro Den Discord and lots more, and we'd love for you to join us. The link for that will be in the show notes. I want to give a special thank you to my sponsors for making this podcast possible. I could not do it without you. I hope you have a beautiful full moon experience. That's it for this week's episode. Tune in next week for even more Petty Astrology.